All right, and welcome back one more time to Reframe Podcast with Colleen Smith. I am Josh Smith, no relation. I have thoroughly loved this entire experiment. I've loved just hearing about your life that is crazy. It makes me feel like I've done nothing with mine in a good way. It's encouraging. What I would like to do is this next segment, this is just story time with Colleen, because there are probably thousands that you have in there that I really think, we talked about this earlier, I think stories motivate people, they inspire people, they push people towards things they would have never dreamt of. They create space for ministry. I really believe that. So I would just like to give you some space. Let's start with Peter. So this is a brand new development to me. I know it's been a while for you, but tell us about Peter.
Yeah, so Peter's 14 now, so he was 9. So about 9 years ago, I met him and his mom. His mom was a very active drug addict in our neighborhood, and I would see her just dragging him everywhere she went. It happened to be summertime, and so I just said to her, I'm like, not that I ever want to promote my summer camp as a babysitting service, but you could send him to this church in the morning, this church for lunch, and then my church in the afternoon, and then on Wednesdays we have this program. Well, part of my back plan in doing that was that I would then be able to build a relationship with her. And so I was able to do that. And so I got to watch her walk through some of her darkest times, but also some of her most victorious moments of going through rehab and dropping her kid off with a stranger and letting him live there while she went through rehab, and watching his dad really struggle to support his wife and be a dad. And it's just been such a sweet relationship with their family. And so 4 years ago, his mom passed away suddenly of a cardiac arrest. Very sad story. It happened in their living room. He watched his mom die. They revived her. They took her by ambulance to the hospital, and then he watched her die again.
Wow.
And so he has this thing about hospitals, rightfully so.
Yeah.
And so after this happened, his dad called me, which is when I realized, I've known, but there are moments in my life where I realize there's a huge cultural difference in a urban population and a suburban setting. Because I feel like if this were a suburban family, they wouldn't have picked up the phone and been like, oh yeah, by the way, I'm also dying of cancer, and my wife and I had discussed that if we ever died, we'd want you to take our son.
Wow.
And I'm like, what?
Wow.
What is happening? But several years before that, I had really just been convicted of watching my kids be pulled out of their homes and go into foster care and not have familiarity. And growing up as a child, if it weren't for my grandparents, that would have been me. And so I went to the Department of Social Services in Baltimore, which this is completely unheard of. The lady even said to me, I don't know how this happened. And I said, I really want to be a foster parent, but only for this particular neighborhood. I'll be open to other things, but I really want kids from this neighborhood. I want to be the first choice. She's like, no, that's not how this works. And then I also told her that I was single and I wanted to do foster care. And she basically said, well, I'm about to burst your single foster care bubble, because every single girl that wants to do foster care wants babies. And I looked at her and I'm like, no, I want teenagers. And she was like, okay, well, let's get the paperwork, because nobody wants teenagers. And that really is my heart. I love younger kids, but I just really have a heart for teenagers. And so I said to her, nope, I only want teenagers. I don't want babies. I don't want anyone younger than 13. I only want teenagers, or I will take a sibling group from my neighborhood. So she's like, I don't think this is going to work out for you. Well, then she pushed my paperwork through, and she was talking to her supervisor, and they're like, no, she could definitely be the first phone call for that neighborhood. And so that's what happened.
Wow.
So I did foster care. It was a very rough road, because I actually got older girls who were aging out of the system, who are already 19 or 20, and they are in the system till they're 21, and then they age out and they go on to another program. And so it was very, very hard. So when Peter's dad called, I was already kind of in a place of is this really what I'm called to do? And it was, but also I feel like I was called to do that to prepare for this moment of there's going to be a kid someday that needs a mom, that needs a home, that needs a place. And so when his dad called me, I was like, I'm about to go out of town for a couple weeks. Let me like pray about this and talk about it. And, I spoke to some people and I'm like, how am I going to raise a child? Like, I'm a missionary who raises my own support. Sometimes I can barely take care of myself. And one person came back to me and said, well, if money is the issue, I think you need to humble yourself and talk to God a little more. And I was like, oh, okay. And I did. And I went home and I was like, you know what? This is an honor and this is a gift. And for me, like, I've always wanted to be a mom, and I'm not, because I'm not married and just other circumstances. And this really was God giving me a gift. And it has been a long 4 years of Peter like being in and out of my house when his dad's in the hospital or can't care for him. And most recently, like been permanently in my home as we're kind of walking through probably the end of the life with his dad. And I was telling you earlier, it's like having a baby. Like he's always there. He's always needing something, and we're learning how to function. And so for him, he watched his mom die. His best friend in elementary school was crushed by a house that exploded in our neighborhood. This past year, at the beginning of the school year, like his middle school friend drowned at Sandy Point. And now he's watching his dad die, and he's been the primary caretaker for his dad for the last 4 years. And so it has been very difficult. And so I have to learn how to have grace with him and but also be a mom. And we have a very, very, very sweet relationship of like Mother's Day last year, we were driving to church and he was like, Miss Colleen, he was like, God took away my mom, but he gave me a mama. And like, how do you not sob?
Yeah, I think you're not human if you hold it in.
And that really is our relationship. And he knows. And we had a moment a few weeks ago, and I've talked about this a few times, and I've told him I was probably going to share it, where he really had a moment of like, you don't know me. Like, you're not my mom, and I don't have a dad, and I don't have a mom. And I was able to look at him and say, well, I'm the mom that like God picked for you in this moment, but also I grew up without a mom and a dad. And yes, I had my grandparents, but like I know what that feels like. And I don't know what it feels like because I was close to my mom and she died, but I know what it feels like because my mom left. And so it is like such a sweet, sweet thing. It's very hard, but I love it. And I wouldn't change it for the world. And he is... I tell people like I pretty much feel like I birthed that child. So yeah.
Well, it's funny, your story, you just keep getting more and more and more ingrained and tied to the community. Like most people, would distance themselves, but you're literally, with every year you're here, I feel like it's another level deeper, which is unbelievable.
Yeah.
Man, that's cool. So I would really love it. This is the part where I want to know, give me the craziest thing that's happened since you've lived in East Baltimore. What's the thing that you're like, I cannot believe?
Aside from my house being raided by the police?
Yeah, that's a pretty good one.
I think the second one is like the redemption story that I have with some of the drug dealers in my neighborhood. So just like... by happenstance, I happened to be sitting up on my deck, and I wish that you could see a picture of my backyard, but I'm going to try to paint it for you. So I have this huge hurricane-proof deck, and in my backyard is this beautiful, beautiful mural that's painted that really is like light in the darkness. And so if you're on my deck, you can literally see over the fence, which looks like a third world country. But then you see my mural, which is like just beautiful. And I love to sit out there and like reflect on like the things that happen in my home in my backyard and the things that are happening on the other side of the fence. So one morning I was sitting out there doing my quiet time, and I watched this whole transaction take place, a gun transaction, a drug transaction, a fight. And I was like, do I move and go in the house or do I just sit here? And I did, and they saw me and I saw them, and but they all know, like, I know what you do, and I'm not the one calling the police because they're seeing you too and they're not doing anything. So why would I make a like issue? Well, due to unforeseen circumstances, literally 2 hours later, there was a raid on the block behind me with police tanks and horses and helicopters and the SWAT team, and they just assumed that I had called the police on them. And it's really true what they say, that snitches get stitches. Like, my life was miserable for several weeks of like They broke in my house. They sliced my tires open. They threw bottles at me when I came home. They like just taunted me, and like to the point of like I was really ready to like throw up a surrender flag and move. And then I like pulled some of my boys up, my teenage boys, and I was like, I really just need you to have a conversation with them. You know them. You hang out with them. Can you please just tell them that I did not do this? And so they did. And these boys came over to my house and gave me probably drug money to replace my tires, but also just had a conversation with me, and they apologized, which is really unheard of. I mean, like, when you rob someone, you're not finding them later to apologize. Yeah. But has really opened up a door of, like, I drive down that street now, and they're like, that's Miss Colleen. We don't mess with her. When a new drug dealer gets initiated into the drug circle, they bring them to my house, and we have dinner, and we talk. And this is Miss Colleen. We don't sell her drugs. Her white friends come over. We don't mess with them. Like, we look out for her. Like, really, like, crazy. I mean, and, like, I was in North Carolina a few weeks ago having, like, a intimate dinner. And I was like, yeah, last week I had these 5 drug dealers over and we had pizza and played games. And they were like, you mean they come in your house? And I was like, yeah, they come in my house. Some of them have a code to get in when I'm not there. I mean, like, that's the level of trust that we have. And so that's probably the craziest thing, because that really is, like, unheard of.
Yeah.
Like,
It's because, and I understand the reaction of that dinner, because our natural inclinations is a distance from anything difficult, anything messy. But me and Pastor Tolly, when he was here, talked about this. I don't live in Baltimore. You know, I've spent a lot of time there, but I do know, I call it, Baltimore has a fierce loyalty in all things. If you're the Orioles, if you're the Ravens, if you're a band that they like, but once they believe in you, everybody in Baltimore, pretty much everything inside that beltway, it's a fierce loyalty. They will fight for you. They will die for you. And you got to earn that. That doesn't come for free in Baltimore at all. And to see that you've built that, like you've gotten rid of the knee-jerk reaction is to run from that kind of stuff, but you've earned it. You've earned their trust. You're on the inside. Now, some people would say, you know, how would you hang around? Well, you're giving approval to I don't see that at all. I see like you're loving them. You're living with them. They're going to do whatever they're going to do. But now at least there's light. There's light in the darkness. Like you get to be that part of the story, which I think is incredible. And I do want to, if you can send us some pictures, Stephen will put them up so they can see. I want to see the house, see the neighborhood. I think people can really benefit from that too. That's cool. That's really cool.
Yeah. And I think being able to build a relationship with them, I'm able to walk through them when they say, like, I'm done with this. Like, I have a kid who's in high school, but last night was gym, and he decided to remove himself from the high school room and come to the middle school room where I teach because of, like, another boy who came. And that for him is huge. Like, a year ago, he was a very angry kid who would walk in and, like, start a fight with the first kid who walked through the door. But he was one of those kids that, like, very easily was falling into that drug trapping ring and has, like, decided that's not the way to go. I'm not saying that it's anything that I've done, but being there and providing a place for him and, like, saying, like, this really isn't what you're called to do. And, like, really investing into their hearts and their minds of, like, this isn't, like, God didn't call you to stand on a corner and lose your life. And so they will tell you, and I said this earlier, like, at 16, you celebrate because you're still alive. At 18, you have a party. At 21, it's a miracle. If you're still alive when you're 25, you're old. Like, that's just how it is in their culture. Wow. And so to see these, like, 16, 17, 18-year-old boys, like, who are still yelling down the street, I love you, Miss Colleen, when you come home, is like, that's just not normal for them. Yeah. Like, yeah.
That's incredible. That's incredible. This is not an attempt to make you emotional, but what are some of the hard times, that the stories that didn't end so well, and how do you process that?
I think I'm still learning how to process that, because it's not fair. Like, even on the way here this morning, I saw an alert come across that another teenage boy had died last night. And it's just like, what is happening? Like, how does this keep happening, and what are we doing wrong? And I used to be a very timid, like, I'll just do whatever I need to do and go with the flow. But a few months ago, I was invited into a meeting. And they invited me because of where I lived, but they had no idea that I was white. And so when I walked in, they were like, And they all were not. And I was very vocal and like they wanted to sit in this room for a year and talk about this money they have and how we can start youth programs. And I'm like, but what about the ones that are already existing?
Yeah.
And why do we need to sit in a room for a year when there's kids dying every single day? And so for me, I still am learning how to process, and I'm still learning how to like grieve the loss of kids that I love when I have to be strong for the kids that are grieving the loss of like a brother or a friend or something. And so this summer, there was a shooting where 5 kids were shot in one event. I'll call it an event. And one of them is a kid that I love so much. And he was still doing things that he shouldn't do, but I had seen so much life change in him to the point where he knew, like, for a long time he was doing it and he didn't know that it was wrong because that was what was ingrained in him. But now he knew that it was wrong, but it never mattered what he was doing. When I would drive by or I would walk up, he would stop, make a point to come over, like very respectful. And so when that happened, it wasn't, I just lost a kid, but like my kids lost a best friend. Our community lost a kid that was very well known. And for days, like you walk through our community and it was just this dark cloud of sadness was everywhere. And then a few weeks later on the street behind me, a young woman who also was really, really trying to change her life was shot in the head while she was pushing her baby in a stroller. And like, I literally like heard it happening. And, you know, a few weeks ago, someone got stabbed outside the church where I live. And so how do you continue to live there and process all of these things? I don't really know the answer to that other than Jesus. Like, other than knowing that, yes, these things are happening, but on the flip side, like there's so many good things happening and I have to constantly remind myself. And so I'll sometimes post on my social media, like, this is my why. If you want to know why I stay here, like, this is why. A girl went to college, a boy's in the military, a kid got a job, a boy has a home to live in. Like, kids are changing their lives. One thing that we do for our kids that I don't talk about a whole lot, which I probably should more often, is these bedroom makeovers. And so we'll bring in mission teams and we'll go in their homes and we'll create them a safe space in their home. And that's been life-changing for some of our kids to have a place in their home where, and the only rule is that every room has to have a bookshelf and a desk, and the bookshelf has to be stocked with books. And most of them, we've done it well. And that's their place to do their homework and like have a place that's just their own. But also we get to build relationships with their families, and that's been life-changing. And we've gotten to know the needs of their families, and we've gotten to know their moms, and their moms trust me. And like, I hate to talk about myself, but like last week a dad called me in tears and was like, Miss Colleen, like, you need to know that like you're like my mom too. Like, you've changed my life, and the way that you've poured into my family has been life-changing. And like, I don't ever want to be like, oh, look what I've done, but look what God has done with me. Like, he took my brokenness and restored it so that I could do this for other people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. How do you communicate to like the people who aren't in it? So like me, like I live, 45 minutes, an hour north of the city. What can we do to make it not so nameless and faceless? I think that's the problem, right? Like, we see the news tickers, we see the all the things that are happening, but it just becomes like a sea of nameless faces. And I don't like that, but I can admit that that's the way it reads to me sometimes. How do we get past that?
I think it's very easy when you're not in the throes of it to just be like, oh, well, I can turn off the news. I can mute the social media posts. I can pretend it doesn't exist. But I think when you have people that you're connected to, or people that you know, or people that you're exposed to who really are in the middle of it, get to know them and get to know the stories that are not the ones that are on the news. And it is so sad that in our city, like, all you ever hear about is the bad things. But what about the, 1,200 kids that graduated high school this year? What about the kids there's a boy who I'm going to meet today who is literally changing lives. He's 19 years old and he's changing lives in his city because no one changed his. Like, what about those kids? Like, why are we not hearing about them? There's a boy in our neighborhood who started a company And like originally it was out of his house. He was making these things called nacho bangers. I don't know if you've heard about them,
No.
but they're like they made some kind of special sauce and like it's like shrimp and Doritos and they're all crunched. I mean, it's the most ridiculous thing ever, but he's built a brand and like has a storefront on Monument Street now. Why are we not hearing about those stories? Like, I think it's very easy when you hear all the bad to just make it nameless and faceless, but get to know those stories, like seek them out because it's not on the news and it's hard. And when you know those stories, like it makes it a little easier to hear the bad ones.
I agree. I think when I was talking about the fierce loyalty, people don't know if you're not around, if you haven't spent time there, but Baltimore is actually an incredible town. Is it mean? Sure, but it's also tough, and you know what I mean. It can take a hit, and it's an amazing culture. And so, what's your favorite thing? Just what do you love about Baltimore City?
I think I love the resilience, and I think like as I've lived there and made it my home, because it really is my home now. Like, I see a lot of myself in Baltimore, like the resiliency and the toughness and the loyalty and the building up and the being broken and the having to be restored and all of the things that are happening. Like, they are happening, but there's restoration that's happening and there are good things and all we see is the bad, but there's so much good.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. This is everything. This has been my favorite podcast. No offense, Pastor Dolly, but this has been really, really good for me. I'm not a numbers guy, but you've given us some pretty cool numbers today. It's 12 women off the street, right? How about how many kids have we gotten through high school?
So 17 have graduated high school.
Incredible.
And we're on track this year for 5 more. So,
nice.
Yeah.
That is so crazy. And I don't think it's possible to calculate the lives that are still here. Like, you just don't know. You can't really know. All right, we got a little more time, right? Super producer, how are we looking? 9 minutes. Okay. All right, well, I just want to open it up, and he can edit this little part out, but like, is there any story that you just think people need to hear that we haven't covered?
Man, there's so many.
There's no pressure. It doesn't have to be.
I want to tell you about Noodles, actually.
Yes. Okay.
So,
tell us about Noodles.
Yeah. So I met Noodles when he was 13. I thought he was probably like 17 or 18. Josh knows, like he's a big boy. Even now he's 20 and he looks like he's 35.
So the last thing I remember about the times I'd be around Noodles is every time he saw me, he would tell me I need to hit the gym. Like a teenage kid, and I'm not, but whatever. Yeah. But that was our running joke. He was like, you need to get to that gym. Yeah.
So Noodles came to us like only because one day they were playing outside and all the kids were like, we're going to go to the church. And he was like, what do they do at the church? And that particular night, we were preparing to take our kids on a camping trip, which just imagine taking these kids from inner city Baltimore to Harpers Ferry, West Virginia, and sleeping outside in tents. And I looked at Noodles and I was like, do you want to go? And he looked at me like I was crazy. And I was like, I don't normally do this because you're not really a part of our program and I don't know your family. But if your mom says yes, I'll come and talk to her. Well, he went home and like told his mom all about this white lady who invited him camping. And she said yes. And so we took him. Noodles has I think Noodles doesn't understand how he's changed my life. I went to Texas last week and Noodles stayed with my child, like in my home by themselves. Like, he is just amazing. So he grew up in a very, very broken home. Like, he's the only one who's a Christian. He got a lot of flack for that when he accepted Christ. A few years ago, we had a preach-off between 3 of our boys. Were you there for that?
No, but it sounds awesome.
So 3 of our boys were like telling Pastor Tully about the elders preaching, and they're like, we could probably do better than that. And Pastor Tully was like, well, let's see how good you can do. And so for several months, I think it was probably from July to October, they were paired with, it's when Pastor Rob was preaching in East Baltimore, Pastor Tully and Mr. Maurice. So they were paired with one of them, and they literally walked through, like, becoming a pastor, basically. And so that night, I'm not kidding you. East Baltimore, you know how small it is in that sanctuary. It was there must have been 250 people in there. And these 3 teenage boys stand on a stage and they each share a part of their story and relate it to scripture. And it was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. But Noodles actually ended up winning. It was a competition. And that kid is anointed. Last year at Thanksgiving, he got up to talk about how important Jim is to him, and he just started preaching. And he has so many goals and dreams and aspirations, and he's writing a book right now. I think I alluded that one of my kids is writing a book. And he just is a kid that has so much resilience.
Yeah.
But he struggles. He's an emotional kid. He'll tell you people think I'm a little feminine, but he's just very sensitive. But he's amazing, and because of Jim, he's able to embrace who he is and walk in his calling and write a book and get a job and do these wonderful, amazing things. I think if I could tell any of my kids' stories right now, he would be one that I would tell. Yeah.
He is what I remember about him, because I didn't, I was around him at church, and he's magnetic.
Mm-hmm.
He
His
lights up a room, and
yes.
people, you just want to be with him. You want to be around him. You want to hear him talk. Is he going into ministry? Is that the calling? Is that
He'll tell you no.
Okay.
But 2 weeks ago, one of the teenage boys was like, "Come on, Noodles, when are you just going to realize you need to be the youth pastor?" I mean, I really think he has a calling on his life, but he really has to be okay with it, I think, and let God work that out.
Yeah. How old is he now?
He's 20.
20 years old. Okay.
Yeah.
That is so wild.
I know.
A preach off. I think we've discovered a new reality TV show that needs to exist.
We need to do it again. It was amazing.
No, it's a great idea.
Yeah.
I mean, you're giving them motivation. You're giving them a chance to share. I love absolutely everything about that.
And then 2 out of 3 of them got baptized that Christmas Eve, after that event.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Before we go, I'd like to just give you one more shot. Tell people specifically where they can find and support all of your different ministries. How can they keep up with what's happening?
They can find me on all social media at Colleen Samantha. They can go to captivatechurch.com/give and there's a pull down bar for Gem. And then I'm very easy. I have a webpage, colleensamantha.org, but it's going through a little revamp right now because I need to start blogging again.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely incredible. I can't thank you enough. I've loved every second of this. Thank you guys for watching, listening. If you liked it, leave us a like and a comment. Subscribe if you enjoyed it. And as always, I want to thank Perry Hall Family Worship Center. It's a church where I and Stephen work. It's also our one and only sponsor that brings this podcast to you because they're crazy enough to believe that there's more ways to minister than just Sunday morning. So thank you guys. We'll see you next time.